This is Coach Jason Ballard, and I'm a business wingman. Over the years, I've learned a lot from working in our family construction business, serving as a senior officer in the United States Air Force, and running 12 different organizations around the world. Many people helped me get to where I am today, and it's my mission in life to serve as a personal wingman to others. That's what this podcast is all about, providing knowledge, tools, resources, and mentorship to help people soar to their highest altitude. Welcome back to the Soar Higher podcast. This is your host, Coach Jason Ballard. Real privileged to be with you today. Today, we got a really exciting topic, one of my favorites. Let's talk about business growth, sales in the new world. How you need to be different, how you need to be carrying yourself and conducting yourself in the realm of sales in order to succeed at that next level. Well, today we've got a legend, an absolute legend in sales, Mr. Jeremy Miner, on the show today. Real privileged to have him here. Let me tell you just a couple of quick things about him, just so you have some background. First and foremost, Jeremy is the chairman and CEO of a company called Seventh Level Communications, which is a global sales training organization. He has over 17 years of experience and has been recognized as the 45th highest earning producer out of 100 million global sales professionals. He's been featured all over the globe. He's been featured on Forbes, Inc., Wall Street Journal, Entrepreneur, USA Today, Yahoo Finance, just to name a few. He's also an author. He and another gentleman, Jerry Acuff, have authored a book called The New Model of Selling, Selling to an Unsellable Generation. Folks, my privilege to introduce Jeremy Miner to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, a couple of updates. I think it looks like someone sent you a very old one-sheet document, but I am no longer the CEO of the firm or the chairman. I probably a year ago, I stepped down from that position. I'm just the founder. So we have a chairman of the company, we have a CEO, and I'm just the boring founder guy. So that's
all right. No problem. Well, Jeremy, welcome to the show, man. You are quite successful in the realm of sales, and the way the economy and everything's working over the past number of years, sales has changed. How did you get into sales? Give us a little bit about your background, your journey, and how you got to where you are
yeah.
today.
Well, it's really, as we talk about how selling has changed, it's really the consumer has changed, right?
Yeah.
So there's a fine line. We'll go into some of that today if you want me to for your community that's listening. So I'll just give you a brief overview of how I got into sales because I might just bore everybody to death. So, I unfortunately for me, I always like to make sure everybody understands. I was not born out of my mother's womb with advanced questioning skills. Unfortunately, let me know if anybody on here watching or listening was born with advanced questioning skills. I wasn't born out of my mother's womb with advanced tonality skills, unfortunately. And I definitely was not born out of my mother's womb with advanced objection handling and prevention skills. I had to acquire those skills. I had to learn those skills, right? So we all have to understand, if you want to really start getting good at the art and craft of selling, we all have to understand that none of us are born with those skills. That is a complete myth. There is no data or science that confirms that somehow in your DNA, when you come out of your mother's womb, you are a born salesperson, right? I just want to make sure everybody understands that. There's no evidence of that. That's just a myth. You don't want to believe in myths because they don't really help you accomplish that much in life. So I got into sales about 22 years ago as a broke, I would say burned out college student. It's like kind of the end of my junior year. And, I went to this recruiting meeting. My roommate said, hey, there's free food there. You can make enough money in the summers where you don't have to work while you're going to school. It's like one of those summer door-to-door sales programs. All right. So I got hired. It was selling alarms door to door. They ship you off to a different city for about 3.5 months during the summer. And I remember they give you a script to try to memorize. They give you a couple of books by the quote unquote sales gurus. They drive you out in a van, okay, in the middle of a not so safe neighborhood most of the time. And they basically like kind of like kick you out of the van and they're like, hey, go make some sales. It'll be easy. We'll pick you up after dark. That was like how I got introduced to this, right? I still remember looking back at my sales manager. His name was Xane, the coolest name ever. He had this curly, crazy blonde hair, like a hippie guy. And I still remember his words that like haunts me to this day. He said, Jeremy, remember when you knock on the door, show them how enthusiastic you are about the product. Show them how much you believe in it, and they're going to believe in it too, and they're going to buy. And I'm like, that makes sense. If I show them how excited I am about it, then somehow they're going to be excited. Well, I mean, what did I know? I was a 21-year-old kid. So I started knocking on doors. I was really excited, talking about the features and benefits and how we were the number one market leader and we had the best this and the best that and blah, 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 blah. And I started noticing from the very first store, I started getting all these objections. What? They didn't tell me about all that. Like, we don't need it. We can't afford it. We already talked with somebody from your company. It's too expensive. I need to talk to my spouse. I need to do more research. I need to think it over. Can you call me back in a week, a month, a year later? Anybody ever get any of
Yep.
those
Happens
objections?
all the
Right?
time to everybody. Yep.
Yeah. So you know what I mean? So I don't know the exact dates, but I'd say probably 7, 8 weeks into that summer selling, hardly making any sales. And when you're paid straight commission, when you don't make many sales, that means you don't make much money. You don't make that much moolah,
You
right?
starve.
So
Yeah.
I remember about 7, 8 weeks in, somewhere in that range. I remember setting on a curve. Like actually I was standing at that point because it was raining or something. So I was standing. It was all humid from that day. You got to remember, like you're talking into June, summer, humidity. You got sweat rolling down your chest and your back. I still remember like my legs like completely like being worn out.
Yeah.
Have you ever sold door to door?
Yeah.
Yeah, so your legs just are like jello after like 10 to 12 hours of day in and day out. And I remember that day I'd worked 12 hours and I made zero sales. So $0. I worked for free for 12 hours. In fact, that week, if I remember, I don't believe I made any sales the entire week. So I'd worked like 60 hours and made $0. And I remember thinking there, like quite literally, like starting to ponder, like, maybe selling just wasn't for me. If any of
Yeah.
you are watching or listening, have you ever felt that way yourself? Have you ever felt that way, Jason, when you got into sales? Like maybe this isn't for me. I wasn't born a salesperson. All these excuses started coming. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I remember when the manager picked us up, he popped in a Tony Robbins CD. And I know it's weird because
Yeah.
22 years ago, people used to listen to these round things called CDs. It's like, what's a CD? My kids are like, CD, what are you talking about? And so Tony said something like this, and I might be butchering it, okay? But he said something to the point that you will fail if you don't learn the right skills necessary to succeed. You will fail if you don't learn the right skills. Now, he went on to say in that CD that everyone is to some point is taught skills. But he said the people who fail, the people who do not do as well, are just the ones who were not taught the right skills.
Right.
They were taught skills, but maybe not the right ones, right? And so it was like the first moment in my life that I started thinking that maybe there were different levels of skills even to the sales ball game.
Yep.
Like there was maybe different skill levels, right? Because I just thought selling was selling. Like everybody had the same skills. I just didn't know any difference from that. And so it was like this light bulb moment that maybe what the company was training me and what I was learning from what I now call the old sales gurus, maybe they just weren't the right skills. Maybe they just were outdated and didn't work as well anymore, right? So I committed to myself that I'm gonna have to do something. I can't keep making $0. This is probably not good. And so, my background at that time, I was going to school, and my background was, what I was studying was behavioral science and social dynamics. Okay,
Hmm.
which I won't give the scientific data on that because it bore everybody. But if I boil it down, it's really the study of the brain and how and why human beings make decisions. Why do human beings do what they do? Okay, so you understand the way the brain works. Decision making, right?
Yep.
Gives you kind of an unfair advantage in sales if you understand it. And so my professors in school, one of them was by the name of Robert Cialdini. Have you ever heard of Robert Cialdini?
I don't think so.
He has he's like one of the most well-known experts on behavioral science in the entire world. But
Hmm.
he has a book. He has several books. One of them is called Persuasion. One of them is called Influence. And so, professors like him and other professors that I was learning from were telling us that the most persuasive way to communicate was over here. But when I was reading the books from all the sales gurus, they were saying it was over here. So we're talking kind of like exact opposite.
Hmm.
So I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So I'm like, how do I take what I'm learning from behavioral science? Because it wasn't like there was they teach like, here's the right questions to ask at the right time. And here's how to use your tone to get them to let their guard down. And here's how your facial expressions display what type of tonality they're going to interpret you're asking the question for. Like they don't teach that, right? They
Yep.
teach theory. So I'm like, how do I take what I'm learning there and wrap that into my sales process?
Hmm.
So I started to learn techniques that work with human behavior. So I started to learn how to get my prospects to do all the work, how to get my prospects to sell themselves, how to get my prospects to overcome their own objections, and really how to get them to pull me in. Okay.
Hmm.
Instead of the way everybody else was taught that you have to do all the work, you have to do all the convincing, you have to do all the selling, you got to overcome their objections, you got to push and you've got to pressure, right? And
Yeah.
when I started switching over to to get them to pull me in, something extraordinary happened. I started noticing that my prospects would let their guard down and they started opening up and they started telling me all their problems and the root causes and how it was affecting them and what they really wanted. And really, pretty quickly, selling became, well, I would say very, very easy and extremely profitable. And that's where it all began right there. Yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty cool story, man. And good on you for kind of recognizing where you were in that scheme of things and what was working, what wasn't working. And, sometimes God works in mysterious ways and Tony Robbins comes on the radio just the right time and you hear the message you need to hear. It kind of clicks and
Had I
you
not
think
heard that
differently.
message, I might not even be here today.
Yeah, yeah, that's certainly possible for sure. So, and it's an interesting background. Your field of study is amazing because I think you're absolutely right. How we sell isn't forcing, persuading, uh, pushing things down people's throats. It's how to connect with people. So, talk to
Well,
us a little.
you can sell that way, but unfortunately for you, you're gonna have to play the numbers game. Okay. And if
Yeah,
you're okay with like working your butt off to get tons of no's, to get a few yeses, you can go that path. However, I didn't want to play the numbers game. I'd rather play the skills game. I'd rather focus on each conversation and the quality of each conversation and
yeah,
actually converting those prospects, most of the prospects I talk to, rather than just going through the motions, hi, my name is, I'm with XYZ company. The reason why I called you was click. See, I'd rather not go through the numbers game because it causes a lot of burnout, as everybody knows.
yeah.
It causes you have to go through rejection after rejection all the time. Most people don't like to be rejected. And if you say, oh, I love being rejected, you're full of BS. Everybody that says that, we all know that nobody likes to be, you don't like to be rejected if a girl turns you down or if a guy turns you down, whoever you date, right? Nobody likes being rejected.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Everybody's got to be accepted. Yep.
Yeah, human behavior 101. So when you get sales trainers says you got to get tough, thick skin. Well, unfortunately, no one can just keep up with the thick skin forever because you don't like to go through that. So instead, why don't we? I can only imagine what society would view salespeople as if they focused on the skills game rather than the numbers game, right? I mean, that's like the equivalent of, do you watch like any pro sports?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So let's
Football,
say you
baseball.
watch, yeah, let's say you watch the NBA. Steph Curry, 3-point champion, just
Yep.
drained you like 45% or whatever I mean, he's almost hitting like half of his 3 points. I could be wrong, 3-point shots.
He
But if
hits a
Steph,
lot of them.
yeah, if Steph Curry was like, you know what, basketball is just a numbers game. Just shoot it as many times as you can. Shoot it as many times. You're going to hit some. You're going to get a few, but just shoot it. It's just a numbers game. If he thought basketball was a numbers game, he would have never made his varsity basketball team. See, Steph knows that basketball is a skills game.
Yep.
He's focused. That's why he practices every day, right? You don't just like throw it up. He practices every day on his technique and his shooting motion and where his hips are and where his, feet are and his
Yeah.
dribbling skills to get open. See, he's focused on the skills game, and that's why he makes and has the highest percentage of 3-point shots made. Can you imagine if salespeople focused on the skills game, if they focused on how to use their tonality to cause the prospect to let their guard down, if they actually knew what types of tonality there was, because there's a confused tone, there's a curious tone, there's a challenging or skeptical tone, and there's also a concerned tone.
Yeah.
So do you know what tone to use, when and why? Do you understand what questions to ask? And do you understand how to, help your prospects like see different things that prevent the objections you're getting from now? Like if you don't understand those things, then unfortunately, you've signed up to play the numbers game. And so when I hear sales trainer says, oh, it's just a numbers game, you got to call more leads, you got to work harder, you got to get more no's to get the yes, that's the equivalent of them saying to you, hey, what I'm training you doesn't really work that well. So unfortunately, you're just going to have to work your little fanny off and just work harder.
Hmm.
What? I don't need.
Who wouldn't
What
want
kind of
that? You know.
who would want? How does that give me any competitive advantage over anybody? It gives me no competitive advantage. I digress. Let's keep rolling.
So, Jeremy, fascinating conversation, and I think you're absolutely right. I think if you're in the world of business and you've gone out there and engaged with clients, prospects, and had various types of conversations with them, whether it's a sales conversation or any other alike, right? The conversations have changed. Buyers' expectations, demands, needs have changed. Especially I think it's been changing for many many years. I think COVID accelerated that and forced some things to happen a little bit faster than they were transpiring on their own. So we're in this new world. Describe this new world, and then describe kind of your methodology of how to adapt to that and meet those needs better.
Well, one thing everybody has to understand is you have to understand what's going on in your prospect's mind. Because if you don't understand the way they think, you are basically winging it, hoping and praying that something you're going to say is going to magically cause them to want to buy. And we call that hopium. It's a drug that so many salespeople and businesses take where they just hope and pray. Slide 43 of the 118 pitch slide deck is going to magically win everybody over. And that is not probably a winning strategy if you want consistent sales day in and day out and increasing sales. Okay. So we have to understand that your prospects you're talking to are far more skeptical and cautious than they have ever been before. Now, why is that happening? Here is one. There's many reasons. I'm going to give you the biggest reason. The biggest reason is your prospects are being sold to every minute of every waking day that they are actually awake. And I say that sometimes in keynotes, and people are like, oh, I'm not being sold to. I hardly ever talk to salespeople. Oh, really? Because what is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning besides going to the bathroom? What's the first thing that the average human being does?
Getting on your phone.
Get on their phone, check their social media, and oh, by the way, what do they see? Ads trying to sell them something. That's where it starts right off the bat. You walk into your kitchen, you turn on the TV, you start drinking your coffee. What do you see and hear? Commercials trying to sell you something. You get into the car because you got to drive to work or drive to the grocery store, whatever you do. You turn on the radio. What do you hear? Radio ads trying to sell you something. Oh, by the way, you drive down the road. What are those big things you see on the side of the road? billboards trying to sell you something. You go into your office, you start getting back on social media, probably 10 minutes in, or let's say best case scenario, it's your lunch break, and you start seeing ads and you start seeing a post by maybe your aunt, Karen, and she's pitching her latest, greatest MLM opportunity. So you are constantly being sold to all of the time. And because of that, human beings have built up a wall of resistance in our survival part of our brain. That is commonly known as your reptilian part of your brain. There's other names for it. But anytime they feel that someone is trying to sell them, what do? They emotionally shut down and they go into fight or flight mode, and they try to get rid of you. Or if they don't try to get rid of you, they'll answer some of your questions. But do you notice when you ask questions that you thought were good, they give you vague, generalized, surface level answers? Well, that's because they feel like you're trying to sell, like won over them. And so it's triggered that defensive wall that you're now trying to break down with your sales techniques. Okay, that is why you have to learn how to work with the way they're already thinking and get them to let their guard down where they become open to. If you cannot do that, unfortunately for you, you're going to have to play the numbers game, and you might make some sales here and there and eke out a living, but you can quite literally make 3, 4, 5 times what you are more if you really understand how to work with human behavior rather than working against it.
Yeah. That's so true. And that's, people, the average numbers are anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 impressions a day that people are exposed to
Yeah,
all day, every day. And so the question is, if you're a salesperson, how do you break through all that? Be
yeah,
different,
yeah.
do
Well,
things that Jeremy's talking about.
I'll give you an example going back to that, and then bring that question back up, because I'll show you some examples of how to use your tone in different questions. I'll even give you
Yeah.
some industry specific questions if you want. One of our clients, his name is Brandon Kane. He's the author, New York Times bestselling author of several books, but one of his books is called Hook Point: How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. He does all the social media for MTV, influencers like Taylor Swift and Rihanna. Like this dude knows social media. And so in his book, he talks about 20 right now. Guess how many content creators we have right now that you are competing with that are trying to take away your prospects' attention. Guess how many content creators we have in 2023 that are quite literally competing against you?
Probably
Oh,
millions.
it's over 3.5 billion.
Oh, wow.
Guess how many content guess how many content creators? Well, yeah, you're competing with 13-year-olds even on TikTok.
Well, I guess that's
You
true.
think,
Yeah.
those are content creators, right?
Hmm.
Anybody that gets on there and does a little dance, you might have 50 followers, but you're competing with that, right?
Yep.
Guess how many content creators there were 20 years ago? Take a wild guess.
Mm,
There's no right or wrong answer. It's
probably less than a million.
You're right. It's a little bit under a million. 20 years later, there's over 3.5 billion. You are competing against that. You are competing with all these distractions
Yeah.
that are
It's almost
taking away
impossible. Yeah.
your prospect. It's almost impossible if you don't understand how to work with their brain. If you do, it's very, very easy because they're not used to it. Okay. So go back to that question you asked me before I went off in my random spill there, and let's see if I can address some things.
So talk about your methodology. We've talked about kind of the landscape, the challenges that people are up against, the consumer demands and COVID and just all those kind of things. And so, it's highly competitive. We've got to connect with people differently, have different kinds of conversations, break down these walls, understand the psychology components of this better.
Yeah,
Talk about your methodology. How do you do
sure.
that? Because you've packaged together something quite phenomenal. It's called the NEPQ, NEPQ. What is that? And
Oh,
tell us a bit about
NEPQ.
that.
Yeah, it stands for neuro-emotional persuasion questions. That's the
Yeah.
methodology I
Okay.
developed in my behavioral science and social dynamic background. But to really give this the proper frame, I'll go over the 3 main forms of communication, and that might help everybody understand where we're all at. Okay, because if you don't know where you're at now, it's hard to be able to get to a higher level if you don't understand what your real situation is, right? So
Makes
basically,
sense.
according to behavioral science, there's three forms of communication. And for everybody listening to us or maybe watching this, I would suggest that you write these down, because once you understand where you're at right now with the way you sell, like your sales ability, even if you're already doing good, even if you're already making multiple six figures a year with what you sell, when I show you the differences here and compared to where you could be, it can change everything for you. All right. So the first mode of communication is this, and I'm going to ask you this question, Jason, and everybody else on here. If I asked you, if I said the words boiler room selling, what's the first image that comes to your mind? Boiler room selling.
Some cookie cutter types of stuff. Language, hard sells,
Would it be
basic.
like any type of movie where there's like a call center and they're just like hard closing, high pressure? Would that possibly come to
Yeah,
your mind?
yeah, that's true. That's a
Like
visual.
Gordon Gekko, Wolf on Wall
Wolf
Street.
on
Like,
Wall
hey, I got
Street.
a
Yeah,
great opportunity for you. And then we push and pressure and tell them why
yeah,
they should go with us. Well, that's the first era of selling. I won't give the scientific term because it wouldn't mean much unless you have a background in social dynamics. You'd be like, what does that even mean, Jeremy? You're a weirdo. You're a geek. But boiler room selling would be the first mode. Okay. So we are, according to the data, we're the least persuasive when we attempt to dominate someone, when we attempt to pressure them, when we attempt to posture them, when we assume the sale too early in the conversation, we're actually the least persuasive. That's where the term sales is a numbers game comes from. Well, why is it a numbers game? They have problems. Your solution solves those. So what's the missing link? What's causing it to be a numbers game? Oh, the techniques you're using is triggering the prospects to run the other way, even though they have problems that you can solve, right?
yep.
So it's just like if you told your spouse you really, really need to do something, and then you constantly push and pressure them, what do they typically do back?
Punch
They
in the
push,
mouth.
they push back. It's just human behavior. When you push, more than likely, human behavior 101 says the other person pushes back, right? Because they feel like they're forced to do something. When the
Yeah,
government, for
equal
example,
reaction. Yeah, it's science. Yeah,
if any government, the United States government or any government says you have to do this or you have to do that, and they make you do something or they force you to do something that's you don't like, what do you do back? You push back, you try to resist, right? Like people don't just like, okay, I'll just do it, right? It's just human behavior 101. Like when the government's rolled out all this stuff with COVID and they're like forcing people, I'm like, you guys like don't understand how the brain works. Like even if it's the best thing since sliced bread, which I'm no expert on any of that stuff, but even if it's the best thing since sliced bread, because you're forcing people to do it, you're naturally going to have most of the population resist that because you're forcing them.
yep.
If you had talked about more like the, kind of what it would do for them and how it would help them here and there and left it up to them, you would have way more people probably do it. Or, and like I said, I'm no expert in pharmaceuticals or vaccines or anything, but just the way that they came
The
across
messaging. Yeah,
triggered that reaction. You're just going to do that because especially Americans, like land of the free, home of the brave, right?
yeah.
The British forcing us to pay the taxes. It kind of goes all the way back to that mentality. Nobody likes to be made to do something. So you're the least persuasive I'll give you a few examples of the least persuasive way to sell. Okay. Giving a presentation. Now we have to have a presentation, but it's how we do it and the length of the presentation that separates top 1% earners compared to everybody else. So when you have, your 60 to 90-minute slide decks, and you're talking about this and you're talking about that, you're talking about features and benefits and how we have the best this and how we have the best that. Well, what typically is going on in your prospect's mind while you're doing all that, right? They don't really care that you have, the here's a picture of our corporate headquarters, here's all of our clients, here's our better business bureau rating, we have the best quality customer service, we have the best owners with the most integrity, right? Every salesperson's ever sold to a company or a consumer says that they're number one or they have the best product
Yep.
or service, right? Like how many salespeople do you know that's ever tried to sell you something and said, you know what, Jason, we're the sixth best in the market?
Right.
No one. They all say they're
Nobody.
the best, right? So when salespeople say that, we don't believe that. It's like if you watch if you ever watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette or any of those type of shows, those seasons where they come out every year. If you ever watch that, they'll be like, "This season is the most dramatic, most exciting season ever," and I'm like,
Yep.
I think you guys have said that the last 24 years. Like nobody believes that anymore, right?
Yep.
It's like you say the same thing that everybody else says. So when we say things like that, or especially when we talk down about our competitors, all that does is it actually causes a prospect to trust you less. Whereas most salespeople feel like they're going to trust them more if they tell them those things. It actually does the exact opposite. And why is that? Because they're used to every single salesperson that's ever tried to sell them anything saying the same damn things, right? So,
Yep.
according to the data, it's not very persuasive if your presentation is more than 10% of your entire sales process, whether you sell B2C or B2B. There's a whole lot of training that goes into what I just said there.
Yeah.
Telling your story. Hate to tell you this, nobody cares about your story when you're selling one to one. Whose story do they care about? Their
Their
story,
own. Yeah.
right? Putting sales pressure on them. See, there's a massive difference in your closing percentages compared to putting external sales pressure on a prospect, trying to push them into do it, rather than learning how to get them to feel so much internal tension about where they are compared to where they could be, that causes them to trigger massive urgency in their brain that causes them to want to change. Massive difference between external sales pressure, between getting them to feel internal tension. Okay. And the big one, assuming the sale. According to the data, very low on the persuasion poll. Hence, that's where the term
Mm.
sales, like I keep saying, sales is a numbers game comes from. It's only a numbers game because of the techniques you're using are triggering the prospect to go into fight or flight mode. And that's the first mode. And I'm going to hurry the second one because I want to get
All
through
right.
this. Second mode is more known as consultative selling.
Yep.
Especially if you've sold B2B, everybody's heard that. Came out, late 70s, 80s with methodologies like Sandler Institute,
Mm.
spin selling, Neil Rackham, college professor, never sold anything, by the way. Good book, though, where basically he taught that you needed to ask questions, like logical based questions, to find out the needs of the client, which was groundbreaking in the 80s compared to boiler room selling. What's
Right.
a potential downfall when you're only asking logical based questions? What type of answers is your prospect going to give you in return?
Yep.
Logical based,
Logical.
surface level answers. And do human beings make buying decisions on emotion or logic? We've all heard
Yep.
it's emotion, right? Brain studies show it's 100% emotion. Okay. So once again, it's more persuasive than boiler room selling, pressuring like that. But you're still, when you're using surface level questions like, can you tell me two problems that keep you awake at night? How many of you are still using those questions? Every prospect has heard that by a gazillion salespeople trying to sell them anything. So when you ask the same surface level questions, like you get on a sales call and say, "How's your day going, John?" I hate to tell everybody, you think you're building rapport, but in the prospect's mind, what are they thinking? They've heard the same "How are you doing?" question
Yep.
from every single salesperson who's ever tried to sell them anything, and most of those they have a negative experience with. So when you ask those type of surface level questions, I hate to tell everybody, most of your prospects do not genuinely believe that you are genuinely interested in how their damn day is going. They know what you're doing, so you're triggering them to emotionally shut down. So we have to relanguage those words, all right? That's kind of the second form of communication, more persuasive than boiler room selling, but you're still going to play the numbers game because you're not bringing up very much emotion with prospects by asking them surface level questions, okay? Now, third mode of selling, the most persuasive according to the data, behavioral science. We're the most persuasive, okay, when we get others to persuade themselves, pull you in. That's called dialogue. When we ask what are called neuro-emotional persuasion questions. Now, the key is we have to understand what questions to ask, and we have to understand how to use our tonality to get prospects to open up emotionally when you ask questions and tell you what's really going on. So those are the three different modes of selling to answer your question.
Wow. Um, so what are the statistics? If you look at each of the three, how much more, if you choose option number three, are you able to sell?
Well, I'll give you the stats. I'll give you the stats. So basically, you know how many salespeople still sell using error number one, boiler room selling, even though a lot of them don't even think they are, because they just don't know what they don't know. So when
70%?
we have over 1.3 million salespeople on our email list alone. So we survey all this stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
1.3. So you're talking like this, and there's other surveys out there, but I'm just going off what we survey. So 76% of salespeople, B2C, B2B, especially B2C, are still using boiler room selling techniques, pressuring, high pressure, assuming the sale too early in the conversation when there's no trust or credibility yet, long-winded presentations, option closes, 1001 way to close. 76% are using the least persuasive way to sell. Now, I believe I want to say it's 23% are in the consultative selling area. That's mainly B2B sales. Okay. Asking logical based questions. We call that service level questions to find the needs of the client, which unfortunately, as we all know, most prospects don't even know what their real problems are when we first started talking to them, right? Or they might know they have a problem, but they don't understand how bad the problem really is. And they especially don't understand the consequences of what happens if they don't do anything about solving the problem. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's a whole
Too
nother train.
busy to think that deep about it. Yeah.
And a little bit less than 1% actually would even know how to use what we're talking about with dialogue. But the funny thing is the top 1% earners, so we train 158 different industries. Top 1% earners in those industries, almost all of them, this is a direct relation, understand how to get the prospect to pull them in, how to get the prospect to open up. And that's why they make more money than sometimes half of their company combined. Okay, as far as sales. So top one, you're gonna be a top 1% earner. You got to learn how to work with human behavior, not work against it. You don't want to keep playing the numbers game. You want to play the skills game if you want to make a lot of money.
Yeah. Otherwise stated as work smarter, not harder. If you want to study, don't go read sales books. Read some of the science and psychology books behind some of this stuff of how people think, how they process, how they engage, how to connect with them on a deeper emotional trigger level, right?
Well, you want to find out, how do I help my prospects understand what their real problems are without telling them? If I
Yeah,
tell them, that's just going to go in one ear out the other, right? You're biased. You're the salesperson. They understand that. But my questioning ability and how I even pace the question, I mean, that's a whole nother thing we talk about is verbal pacing. How do I pace out a question that causes the prospect to internalize what I'm asking and think deeper about the question? You want me to give you a few examples?
sure.
Okay, I'll
Love it.
just give you some generic examples here because I don't know what type of industries listen to your show.
All types.
Okay, so I'll have to be generic here,
All
right? Not
right.
industry specific. We train 158 different industries. Okay, so I'll give you an example of what's called an NEPQ probing question, and I'm going to verbal pace it out two different ways, and I'm going to show you how I can say the same words and I can get two different thoughts from the prospect by simply focusing on one word and pacing it out. How I can get two different ways that they think with the same prospect. Okay, so let's say if they said, oh, they're talking about buying something, and I lean in. This is, let's say, halfway through the conversation. Like I said, this is just going to be generic. And I say, okay, so they said something was, oh, I really want to have this and get this solved, blah, 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 blah. I really want XYZ problem solved so we can do ABC. Let's just say they say something like that. So you're going to lean in and say, okay, so can I ask, like, why so important to you now, though? Why so important to you now, though? See that verbal pause? And then I said, now though. I focused on and I emphasized now though. See, that is a timing question. So now they're going to think why it's important now, like right now. However, I can ask that same question and I can focus on a completely different word like this. Okay, so why so important to you now though? What word did I focus on? Important. Why so important now, though? Okay, why is this so important now, though? See, I focus more on important. Why so important? Now they're thinking why it's so important, not why now, though, like timing.
Yeah.
See, I can
Amazing.
ask the same question, but focus on two different words and have a verbal pause in between. And why is that verbal pause so important? Because it gets the prospect to internalize what I'm asking. If I just said it like this, okay, but why is this so important to you now? Well, I mean, it just is. See, it's too fast. There's no pace there. I don't give them any time to think about it. Let me give you an example of two people that are really, really good at verbal pausing and verbal pacing when they're talking and or asking questions. Tony Robbins is really good. You ever watch Tony?
I do. Yeah.
If you go to his events or just watch him on YouTube. Everybody go to YouTube, watch Tony Robbins when he gets in the crowd. You're going to notice when he asks questions, when he says something, he'll stop for like 2 or 3 seconds and then keep asking the question or keep saying something. Why does he do that? Because it causes the prospects to engage. It's like almost impossible for them not to lean in about what he's going to say or ask next. Now, a really good politician that was really exceptionally good at this. And I don't get into politics either. We're just a sales training company. We just teach people how to sell more. Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, Blue Party, Red Party, whatever party you are. I don't care. Okay. You just do your thing, everybody. But one person I just watch politicians for how they communicate. Okay. And like President Obama, if you ever watch him in his speeches, regardless of what you believe about his policies, was probably one of the best communicators as far as verbal pausing and verbal pacing, because he would talk and he would slow down and he'd verbal pause between words, and it would cause everybody to do what?
Lean
Lean into
in.
everything he was saying. Okay. Now, the current president, whether you like him or not, President Biden, not so great at that. You just hear him kind of talk and he kind of rambles about things. And that's why he doesn't influence his supporters as much as President Obama would. He doesn't have the loyal backing, right? Then they might still vote for him just because that's their party and they don't like the other person, right? But they voted for Obama because they loved Obama, right? No matter what. Okay, that's the difference, because of the way he communicated caused his people to like massive fans. Whereas the current president just kind of rambles. You don't really know what's going on. I think he might be better at other things, but his speaking style is just not
Yeah.
up to par like President Obama's would.
Yeah, yeah. People say the same things about, Reagan or Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had all these scandals and all these things that kind of tarnished his presidency, but everybody loves Bill Clinton because he can connect with those people. He's a great. I had the privilege of seeing him a few years ago when he came to Louisville for Muhammad Ali's
Yeah,
funeral,
yeah,
and he's just a very
yeah,
sharp, polished
yeah.
speaker in all of
Clinton
those
was a
dynamics.
very good
Amazing.
speaker. So was President Reagan. Now, like President Trump, he had some really good things that he accomplished, but the reason why a lot of people don't like him is because of the way he communicated.
Yeah,
They didn't even look at what his policies were. They didn't care because of his communication style. So
yeah,
that's something, if you're a politician, you got to be really wary of. You can have the greatest policies in the world. You can save everybody from cancer, whatever, greatest economy in the history, but nobody gets to even look at that if the way you're communicating triggers resistance. It's a whole nother training that we could talk, a whole nother
yeah. No, that's a whole nother session right there.
yeah.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much, man. You've given our audience such great wisdom, such high quality takeaways and in the realm of communicating, connecting with people, being more interpersonal, especially in a world today where everything's like politicized and polarized, and everybody's so sensitive and just kind of already tense about things. You have a very calm, cool demeanor in allowing somebody to, if they follow your process, to really navigate that and ease people up a little bit and get everybody to just
Well, if you
kind
want to
of
move people more towards your way of thinking, one of the greatest quotes ever by a great communicator, Stephen R. Covey, when he talked about first seek to understand and then be understood.
Yeah.
So if you want to move people closer to your way of thinking, I hate to tell you this, by attacking their beliefs and saying that they're wrong, that is not going to get them over to your side. All they're
Nope.
going to do is dig in their heels and defend their position even more. So if you want to move people towards your way of thinking, you got to first seek to understand where they're coming from, and they're much more open to understanding where you're coming from, and they move closer towards you.
Yeah. Yeah. The law of attraction is powerful, Jeremy, and you've really demonstrated that on an incredible level today. So thank
Well,
you
we're
so much for
trying to
your
get better
time.
every day. Thanks for having us on. That was really fun.
Yeah, man, loved having you on. My goodness, we can probably have many, many, many more sessions if you were able to just kind of get into these different aspects of what you're talking about and the science and all that stuff behind. It's very fascinating, and just think about it. I mean, it makes total sense, and just really appreciate your wisdom today.
Yeah, and if any of your people, and I apologize, I didn't have more time to get into like specific, NEPQ questions that
Yeah,
your community could use to sell more of whatever they sell. So if they want more of those questions, I don't mind giving them some. I told you about that. So if they want to join one of our free Facebook groups, we can just message them a free training on that if they want it. Have them go to salesrevolution.pro. So just salesrevolution.pro. There's, I want to say 85,000 some people, and they're salespeople, business owners, all industries. And right when they join, can you have them DM me, Jeremy Miner? Now, it's probably not going to be me responding back. I just, I don't have time these days. So every once in a while, I'll get in there. But
you know,
somebody,
people.
somebody on my team, just when they DM me, just say, hey, I was on Jason Ballard's show, and Jeremy said that he would send me what's called the NEPQ Black Book of Questions for free. NEPQ Black Book of Questions for free. It's like a 58-page book. It's going to have like 240 some different questions they can use for different places or different circumstances they're going to be in when they're in like a B2B or B2C sales role, or even B2G, or even door to door.
Yeah,
And we'll give that to them for free. But have them join the Facebook group, because that's where they'll be able to get that. And if they want a book as well on sales that's really tactical, this is my first book that we published. Is called, and you brought it up, The New Model of Selling to an Unsellable Generation. It's a Wall Street Journal bestseller, Barnes & Noble bestseller, Amazon bestseller. Have them go to Barnes & Noble's website, though, to buy this book. I'd prefer that, even though I love Amazon, but we have a much better deal with Barnes & Noble. So if they go to barnesandnoble.com, or they can just walk into the store, they're pretty much everywhere, in the retail stores, and they can get this book for, I think, 16 or 17 bucks. If they don't have the $17, let us know, and we'll set up a GoFundMe page so they can get the $17 so they can learn how to sell more. All right. I'm always pulling everybody's leg, but they're welcome to get this book that Jerry Acuff and I wrote. Jerry Acuff is the CEO of Delta Point Consulting. It's a very large sales consulting firm on the East Coast. So we wrote this book together, put a lot of tactical training in this, not just theory and just rah-rah, because that always pisses me off when I just read motivational books about goal setting.
right. Yeah,
I already know how to set goals. I just need to know what to say to hit those goals, right? So it's
that's
all
right.
it's all in there if they want to get the book at barnesandnoble.com.
Awesome. Great, Jeremy. Thank you so much. We're going to put all of Jeremy's contact information that he related to, all of his books, his access to some of his tools and resources that he's so generously offering today. Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. And that's all for today, folks. Stay tuned for next week. Next week, we talk about the secrets of building sustainable wealth in uncertain times. You won't want to miss that show. Look forward to seeing you then, and have a great week, everybody.